Now, in over 19 weeks of carnage, over 36,000 Palestinians have now suffered violent deaths at the hands of Israeli weapons. And once you include, that is, those buried under the rubble, who I'm afraid to say, of course, must be considered dead. Now, of course, that means women and girls, boys and men. All Palestinians, whoever they are, of course, have suffered horrors beyond most of our imaginations. But the impact of such military onslaughts always have profound gendered implications. Most of those who have been killed are women and children. There are 2 mothers dying every hour. There are 50,000 or so pregnant women in Gaza without healthcare now, which is the system has been essentially destroyed. There are women in labour having C-sections without anaesthetic. There are babies being taken from the bodies of their mothers who've been killed. There are women using scraps of Tenter's period products. There are breastfeeding mothers at risk of terrible health complications. We really could go on. Yeah. And then there are now reports from the United Nations about Palestinian women being sexually abused and raped by Israeli soldiers. Now, I'm really delighted and honoured, actually, to be joined by Maryam Aldossari, who is an academic who wrote a really brilliant piece back in early January for Jazeera, which is entitled "For Feminists, Silence in Gaza is no longer an option." And I think a lot of people were quite relieved when this was said, given the horrific consequences for women in Gaza. And it must be said, intersectional feminists really have been at the forefront of speaking out against Israel's onslaught. This should not be seen as some sort of, this discussion is not an attack on feminists. I'm speaking to a feminist. It's about how some who have partly called themselves feminists who haven't spoken out, the silence about Palestinian women, which must end. So thank you for joining us, and it's an honor to have you.
Thank you so much, Owen, for having me. And similar to you, I share the same frustration with the whole situation, how our government is reacting, but also because I'm a feminist, I'm quite disappointed with the feminist movement in general. But again, as you said, it's not all feminists. A lot of feminists is marching every week. And when I talk about certain feminists, the most famous, well-known feminists who are supposed to fight against violence and made a career of saying that they are fighting against violence for women and children. And what you mentioned, the report is quite frustrating and upsetting, but it's quite important to point out this is not new. For 75 years, women in Palestine have been raped, sexually assaulted, and it's never made it to the permanent or mainstream media. And so to dismiss the 75 years and just be shocked by a small report that happened now, it's not new. There is thousands of women have reported that they've been assaulted by the soldiers through investigation, and it's never made it to the mainstream media. But also the reaction of mainstream media is quite not surprising. Since the Israeli and Palestine, and I will not call it Israeli and Hamas war because it's against Palestinian people, and still you see in the news saying Israeli and Hamas. And there is a main story, a very upsetting story that showed that Israel is the shining example of civilization, while Palestine needs civilization and need to be saved from Hamas. And the misrepresentation of the Arab community in that mainstream media, to the extent that they call them the kingdom of animals, which is extremely racist and misleading. But that's also not shocking. We know how is the media have been presenting, and you have some websites or a newspaper who have been extremely played a major role in this propaganda machine of producing this image. Was quite shocking that feminism also adopt those values and reproduce them and manifest it in the media and all those articles. So you see, for example, since the October attack happened, even before the IDF presented the case of rape of Israeli women, they just jumped in it. Sympathy was only to Israeli women, and there is no extended sympathy for Palestinian women. And I read most of the article have been published about rapes of Israeli women. And don't get me wrong, I'm a feminist. I will always believe rape, even if the evidence was presented by IDF and there was no witnesses or the victims speaking themselves, I will still believe the woman. But why the sympathy didn't extend to Palestinian women? Why did you assume that they just need to be saved from Hamas and assume that they haven't been raped, haven't been sexually abused? The same bins with the trucks, all those articles, they didn't show any sympathy for Palestinian women, not even mentioning them in one sentence that the violence extended to Palestinian women. And that's what's, and I, as a feminist, I looked also at all the very famous, well-known feminists that I used to hold a huge respect for them, saying, to see, there must be an outrage, there must be empathy that we all can drive from. And anyone who did that, I'm afraid they were disappointed by the silence from those feminists and feminist organization as well.
I mean, on that, just so people are clear about the United Nations report which has come out, and they write, we are particularly distressed by reports that Palestinian women and girls in detention have also been subjected to multiple forms of sexual assault. After being stripped naked and searched by male Israeli army officers, at least 2 female Palestinian detainees were reportedly raped, while others were reportedly threatened with rape and sexual violence. They also noted that photos of female detainees in degrading circumstances were reportedly taken by the Israeli army and uploaded online. Now, obviously, these are very grave allegations, and I suppose the point you're making there is, very serious claims of sexual violence against Israeli women were made on 7th of October, which need to be clearly investigated and taken seriously. But people spoke about that very loudly, often in the context of supporting, I suppose, the onslaught against Gaza, which mostly then killed women and children. But if they're not speaking out about this, then what does that tell us? If they're prepared to speak out about those claims, which do need to be clearly, definitely investigated, why not this? What does that tell us?
I agree. But first, before I say that, I was looking at reports from 20 years ago. There was a report in United Nations Human Rights. There is a Human Rights Watch. There is even by Taslim, which is the Israeli Information Center of Human Rights in the occupation territories. All of them mentioned that there is rape happening in the prison by Israeli soldiers. And when they dismiss all of this, and now again not speaking about it, it's very clear. It is the idea that we don't see the problem if you are not like us. And this is very embedded in the very imperial and colonization feminism. And we saw it for a long years in the history. And if you take, for example, the case of Mahsa Amini, the Iranian person who was killed because she wasn't wearing a proper hijab, that created a massive movement of feminists, especially in UK. Some organization, they went and cut their hairs in public in central London in a way of solidarity. And why this case, not Palestinian case? Because it fit the idea of liberation women from hijab, liberation, and bear in mind, I'm not even Muslim. Liberation of Muslim women from Muslim dominant value and saving them from men. And previously in the history, you saw these ideas of liberation women from brown men, basically. And you saw it justifying the war in Iraq, in Afghanistan, where it was justified partly because we are trying to save this woman from the dominant Muslim ideology in those countries. And what did it create after that? A massive mess. Women have been when the Afghanistan case, for example, created more opportunity for Afghan women, but still the mess is women is in most precarious position now. There is lack of support, and this dismisses the idea that what women from this context actually want, just assuming that our liberal thoughts will be should embedded in the society. And imperial feminism haven't learned from the history. It have been repeated break record, doing the same mistake, justifying violence, creating violence, and the idea that we will save brown women from brown men. And you see it in the case of rape. And I'm sorry to say that's the uncomfortable truth, that when it's a brown woman accused of raping a white woman, it will make it to media. There will be outrage. But when the idea that a brown woman is raped by Israeli soldier, it doesn't. It is kind of questionable. The resources is unreliable. And that's have been through the whole history, and it's very dominant in the feminist movement. And they are not learning from that, especially within the Palestinian situation. In a state of understanding what happened, they completely dismiss it as casualty of war. And that's the main idea that they are promoting. And it has been through the history, and it's repeating itself again and again.
I mean, in terms of the silence, I mean, it does seem, I have to say, that a lot of people are just going to brazen this out. Both of us, I think, have looked to see just general media coverage. Almost no Western media outlet has covered this. CNN, surprisingly, did, given how terrible, given, well, a study which came out actually in the Guardian US just showed how CNN's coverage had been very biased in favor of Israel, and it went through the facts and statistics show that. So the fact that CNN has reported on this is striking, but almost no other media outlet has. I mean, is this about Palestinian women not being seen essentially as being?
Yeah, because through this process, when you see them as people, they need to be saved from the society, they dehumanize not only Palestinian women, also men. Men are victims from this war. You cannot assume every man in Palestine is part of Hamas. And they, to the extent that any sympathy you show to men in this context, it's not acceptable. You will get all this kind of comment. What about Hamas? What did they do? Condemn Hamas. And it's from the start of from the war, there was tactic, unfortunately, by feminists, by silencing anyone who will speak about it. And people get scared. So anything you say, you will be called rape apologetic. You will call anti-Semitism. You will call pro-Hamas. And they kept doing it to the extent that people start to be very careful not to talk about it. And unfortunately, they use the same tactic that have been used to them to shut them when they talk about any gender issue. And it just, any concept not related to what they believe is a liberal society, like you saw how they portrayed. There are several articles have been published. I will fight for civilization Israel. And why would you assume Palestinian is not civilized? It's just this kind of biases, racist idea, and you can see it. And you think in this time things change. It's actually not changing. It's exactly the same. And they dehumanize Palestinian women, and I don't understand how in the future those people think that they will value their works, even if they did amazing work in terms of women. Like, they lost any credibility of their work if you cannot say what is quite obvious. Palestinian women is victims of this war. Palestinian women and children have been raped and lost their homes. Women, the image of women digging to find her kids, women giving birth without anesthesia. It's unimaginable, and still it doesn't create any outrage. And I thought after the International Court of Justice stated that Israel acted act of genocide against Palestinians, that will change the conversation, but still complete silence. And within those feminists, I really try to think about it, why they are silenced. Some of them in this idea that it's Islamic extremists and they need to be saved. Other will use the argument that LGBTQ is not getting the rights in the society. But what does it mean? Let them die? Or LGBTQ is part also of Palestine. So it doesn't make any sense. And others choose to be politically right by keeping silence, hoping that their silence will not be noticed, but their silence is quite loud and noticed. And you're sending a direct message to Palestinian women that your life doesn't matter, as not equally as the Israeli woman.
Because, I mean, the point you make there, speaking my own lane, I suppose, as a queer person, because I've spoken out about pink washing and Gaza. I often get, for example, you know, people who don't have any interest in LGBTQ rights will suddenly start speaking about it in this context, including either sending images of ISIS in Syria, completely separate, throwing gay men off roofs, or even generating AI images of me being thrown off a roof. But the point is firstly, whatever one, just in terms of accuracy, there isn't the death penalty in Gaza for homosexuality. I'm not saying it's a great place to be gay, clearly, no one's arguing that. But the fact is, 1,000, if we're going to go by statistics now, 3% of every given society is LGBTQ. That means over 1,000 LGBTQ Gazans have now been killed by Israeli weapons, and one of those whose homes have been destroyed, who can't get healthcare, whose loved ones have been murdered. because those it just shows, I suppose, that weaponization isn't about advancing the rights of LGBTQ Gazans. It's just a weapon in support of a military onslaught.
Yeah, and it doesn't need any big, massive understanding to know that they will be killed as well. So by using this argument and being careful, oh, it's a complex situation. This is not under the umbrella of feminism. We should understand the differences, and I hope it will change in the future. But it doesn't mean that letting them die and use it as a weaponized to create this kind of violence. And if you look at the beginning of the conflict, there was a lot of labels have been throwing against, oh, what about queer Palestine and that and that. And there was a massive attack if any organization put a statement in supporting of Palestine. So I don't understand, why do we have to pick up a side? Why can't we sympathize with all? And here in this case, Palestinian is suffering more than Israeli civilization, and they are dying more. And it's get to the situation that people are dying on daily basis. So people keeping silence, I honestly don't know how they will face the world, or how do you think they will have any credibility in their work in the future?
Well, just on that, I mean, you know, and again, it's very important, I'm demarcating intersectional feminists who really have been so much at the forefront of opposing this, I would regard as a genocidal onslaught against Gaza, and those who aren't intersectional feminists. And not for a second would I say that they looked at what the allegations, the serious claims made in terms of sexual violence against Israeli women, and you know, they were genuinely, they felt huge amounts of trauma and grief and fury when they saw those reports, not confected. The point is, they've clearly seen these reports and they haven't felt that. I mean, if they spent enough time to think about it, they would surely understand that that's a self-evident truth. There's total silence amongst the same people. And I wonder, is it, you know, I mean, that just shows it's so ingrained what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I couldn't sleep the first night when I saw the pictures and images of Israeli women, but also in the same time I sympathized, because I knew what will happen and how they will weaponize that to genocide all Palestinians. And the main thing that also throwing all the time in the media, in basic daily, throwing anti-Semitism to shut any conversation is absolutely ridiculous. We have Jewish people with us in the march every week, with us standing in the march, but they use it to shut any conversation, any sympathy, and saying that you are anti-Jewish if you are supporting Palestine. And that's quite embedded in the movement. And again, as you said, it's not all feminists. And I got a lot of emails after I wrote those articles saying that, well, I am there. I was like, I'm talking about some feminists who is followed by a lot, and they could use their platform to highlight the problem, but they use it actually to silence the conversation and just talk about random things.
I mean, the points you made in that piece, it's just to really bring them out. So, for example, you said that as well as those who've been slaughtered, obviously we're talking about the almost complete breakdown of the healthcare system, coupled with the lack of food and clean water, means that some 45,000 pregnant women and 68,000 breastfeeding mothers in Gaza are facing the risk of anemia, bleeding, and death. Hundreds of Palestinian women and children in the occupied West Bank are still in prison, many without trial, and trying to survive in abominable conditions. I'd also note Save the Children did a report last year, I believe, which detailed reports of sexual abuse against detained Palestinian children in the West Bank. And you said, you know, I just think it's so striking that these are, I mean, in terms of the feminists you're talking about, not intersectional feminists, this particular brand of self-described feminists, they will speak about so many issues. But how bigger an issue could there be in terms of issues facing women than those you have just detailed? And there's so many others.
That's the problem. It's made them irrelevant. I follow their work. I believe in some of their work, but they made them irrelevant. If you can't stand anyone, like I couldn't work the first 3 months when it's happened, because I couldn't function knowing that people are dying every single minute, and children have been raped, women have been attacked. I read yesterday children sleeping in a cage. Like, it's the end, it's the break of morality. And those feminists unfortunately, feminism now became a fight of which the tribe you belong to, instead of having the same value that we all fight for, which is fairness and civilization for all. So they are busy having each one, whatever they call themselves, gender critical, or whatever type of feminism they are assigned to, or radical, or whatever. They are busy fighting and having the tribes and going against whatever they think is woke. And you can be gender critical, but in the same time, you can sympathize with the Palestinian. I don't understand why do we have to be in certain category and just don't go beyond it. It's like agenda have been circulated. That's the position we are taking, and we should stick to it. And if we follow this kind of ideas, we should say farewell to feminism as we know it, and then we'll have government intervention, like what happened in France when the Ministry of Gender Equality put a statement that any organization didn't show from the start support to Israel will get no fund. And then we are heading to this way. Government intervention, break of feminism, and everything have been fought for years is just will be lost the value of it.
I mean, on that as well, I think, do you think one of the lessons here is, if I talk about, for example, Benjamin Netanyahu, he does this big speech and then suddenly he suddenly switches from Hebrew to English, clearly aimed at an international audience, saying, where are the women's organizations? Why aren't you speaking out about what's happened to Israeli women? Now, let's be honest, I don't believe that somehow Benjamin Netanyahu is someone who is committed to the emancipation of women. I'm not going to believe that. So I suppose it's about what we're talking about there is men talking about this in the service of a military onslaught, which actually then slaughters so many women and has catastrophic consequences. So we need to somehow take out allegations to demarcate serious allegations, which have to be investigated, away from how they can be weaponized to support a genocidal war. So how do we do that? Because it is important to take these questions very seriously without going, well, it's just a conspiracy to support war efforts. So how can we do that demarcation?
The only thing we are asking for, so same sympathy that you show to Israeli women, to Palestinian women, and it's not new. We know from history that violence against women, the most vulnerable groups and children, have been repeatedly in the war. Rape have been happen in all wars. And I'm not saying, and obviously I completely sympathize, but it's not new. But how Israel used it to justify the genocide and the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, it's unacceptable. It's unbelievable. And we are watching that. And we also, the media is enforcing it, and feminists reinforcing it again. Those people have thousands and thousands of followers. If they keep writing articles about how they are heartbroken about Israel and the rape of women, while not mentioning or acknowledge any rape and violence against Palestinian women, you are sending a clear message to all Palestinian people, or actually anyone who is not white, that your life doesn't equally matter to other people.
I mean, just on that, just before my final question, I mean, in terms of kind of the way this is kind of played out, I suppose, do you think this could be a schism within the feminist movement, in that there's lots of conflicts? Obviously, the feminist movement isn't homogenous, but there's always been these tensions around intersectionality, about is this a feminism which is inclusive, or is it simply, often prioritizing white middle class professional women in the West, in the global North? I mean, do you think this could actually, because this, in my view, has painted so many injustices in so many primary colours that it's become quite a teachable moment. So do you think this that could be what emerges from this, partly?
I hope so, and I hope that we come all together. And as I mentioned earlier, I do associate some of my view with those people, but it's still, like, when genocide happened, you drop everything and focus on that. And I'm hoping that feminists will learn that it's not only your agenda that's quite matter. There is other people's agendas that quite matter. And it is not inclusive the way it is now. There is so many division. There is so many self-interest. There is so many self-career building people who's using feminism just to be famous and well-known. And this situation, for me personally, highlighted who is the people I will read their work in the future. And their silence will never be forgotten. people will not forget who was silenced in this time, who was not supporting Palestinian people.
Maryam, that's been so incredible to be able to speak to you and to be able to just, I think, put this in the context that it needs. I do think, look, again, I keep saying this to lots of people. I've worked in the British media now for a very long time. I'm aware of its racism and, you know, the rampant structural racism embedded within this often depraved industry, morally speaking. But it's still often shocking to see how things play out. And I do think the way that many are now trying to just brazen this out, you know, because I suppose the key point is, you know, one key point here is, you know, Britain and the West arms and supports Israel. So it's easy to speak out when it's about alleged crimes perpetrated by forces hostile to the West. But when it's actually a test of, well, your own government and much of your media is complicit in what we're talking about, that's when you have leverage. That's when you can actually speak out and do something. And the fact that people remain silent at that point, I think that is why the voices of people like yourself is so important right now. So I would include
a great job highlighting everyone and bringing conversation in. So that's, and I want to say that a lot of people appreciate it as well.
Well, I hate being complimented, but I will take it from you anyway. But and what's most important with my platform is to support and offer the megaphone to people like yourself. And I'll include a link to the article because it's so important. And also a link to your Twitter page because people should follow you. Thank you so much to Maryam, who's, as you can see, a brilliant, articulate fighter for the emancipation of women. Please like, subscribe, do share this video, and thanks for our brilliant guest.
Thank you. Thank you so much.